So I have been teaching college students for almost 30 years. And what I have learned is at the last class meeting before a holiday, people are ready for the holiday. So you should bring something that's important, something that's worth showing up for, but not something that's really, really intense hard work. So that's what I brought today. Last week, when I was done with class very early, that surprised me. I thought we would go the whole 90 minutes. So I had an off week. This week, I don't think we'll go the whole 90 minutes, and that's on purpose. But what we are talking about is something important. I, 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago, took my first ever class in public speaking. About 12 years later, I taught public speaking to college students for the first time. For that entire period, I was on my school's speech team and then debate team, and I did it competitively. My first job out of graduate school, I was the coach at Arizona State University, which is a big university, one of the 10 biggest in the United States. I coached their speech and debate team. Students I worked with actually won several United States national championships in various speaking events. So here's what I'm going to do today. A really good speech is a lot of verbal communication, verbal choices. It's about research, it's about language, it's about organization. Those are all things we don't talk about in this class. But delivery, the delivery of the speech, that is all nonverbals. So what I've come today, I'm going to show you two speeches, each of them 10 minutes long. In between, I am going to talk about public speaking delivery for American audiences. And we're going to have time for you to ask questions if you have any. My hope is when you see what the speakers do, and when I then point out some of what they're doing, then that will make you curious. That will spark some things you want to know more about. Both of the speakers, well, of the two, there are two big categories for competitive public speaking in college in the United States. There is informative speaking, and informative speaking is just, there's information that the audience probably doesn't have. You should explain it so that they understand it and they understand why it matters. But you should not take a side and you should not persuade them. The first speech we're going to see today is the 2015 National Championship speech in informative speaking, American National Championship. The other big category is persuasion. So that speech, you should identify a problem. You should convey to the audience that the problem is important, that they ought to care about the problem. You then ought to propose a solution that the audience can participate in. The second speech we'll watch today is the 2019 American National Championship persuasive speech. And part of what we'll talk about today is how your delivery should change based on, is the speech primarily informative or primarily persuasive? And you'll see the difference between the two speeches. So that is my warm-up to get us started. Without further ado, assuming the equipment decides to cooperate, here is the 2015 American National Championship speech in informative speaking. One more thing before I start it. He's speaking in a large room. It echoes. The acoustics are not perfect, but I've made a transcript of the speech. It's in Moodle. It will become visible at the end of class today. All we're doing is watching his delivery. But if you want to go back and check on what he said at any points in the speech where you couldn't understand him, you can do that after class with the transcript that will be available to you through Moodle. Okay. Let's see. Yeah, here we go. I think.
In July of 2012, a Walmart store manager received an urgent phone call from his corporate headquarters. Walmart executive Gary Darnell had called the manager to tell him his store had been selected for a new pilot program. He just needed some information. CNN by August 8, 2012 explains, within minutes, the store manager gave Darnell the employee payroll, shift schedule, and tons of private information. The only problem is there was no pilot program, and Darnell has no recollection making this phone call. Which makes sense. Because the phone call actually came from a casino in Las Vegas, and Darnell was actually Shane McDonald, a security researcher and competitor at the American Social Engineering Contest. The Daily Dot, September 4th, 2014 explained. The contest is a part of the annual DEF CON hacking convention held in Las Vegas, in which competitors perform routine security breaches on Fortune 500 companies, but only using methods of social engineering, a technique used to get around security systems to obtain information by simply exploiting the vulnerability in the human regarding the information. So, for example, instead of trying to crack a password by installing some kind of virus, a social engineer would just call the tech support agent, convince them to reset the password, and give it to them. Social Engineering Inc. on April 28, 2014 explained, last year alone, social engineering attacks accounted for 1.8 million victims in healthcare fraud, 2.4 million victims in email fraud, and over 37 million phone call fraud. But as EM Associates' 2014 study concerningly notes, more than half the employees in this country still receive little to no security awareness training each year. So, to not only shed light into the fastest growing security threat in corporate America, but also provide a powerful lesson in this new era of privacy. Well, first, explore what exactly social engineering is. Then, see an attack in action. Or finally, engineering simplification through an author and social engineer Chris Hackney does. The art of human hacking. Perhaps the most iconic example of a social engineer is depicted in Steven Spielberg's 2002 film Catch Me If You Can, a retelling of 1960s con man Frank Abagnale's elaborate masquerade of Chekhov. So, to further understand how social engineering, or SE, has evolved since Abagnale's days, let's cover some basics. First, who exactly are these social engineers? Alternative Network of July 28, 2014 explains. The world of social engineering draws a lot of people, from professional spies to information brokers to hackers, which is hackers plus activists. Often disgruntled employees. But above all, SEs hide in plain sight, disguised as the friendly janitor, the curious customer, or in McDonald's Walmart story, the false authority. So, with this in mind, what exactly does an attack look like? In their February 18, 2015 report, Hacking the Human Operating System, Intel Security breaks down an attack in 4 steps. Step 1, research. SEs collect research from company websites, employees' social media profiles, any public information that will help them engineer an attack. Step 2, target. This is when the SE targets the employee network and giving them information, often becoming familiar with the target's hobbies, likes, or dislikes. Step 3, the approach. And this is where the SE separates the employee from the a social engineer known only as the Ghost began collecting research from a global company to perform a routine security breach. Now, after researching for a month, he identified his target, Amanda, the company receptionist. So during the targeting phase, the Ghost scoured Amanda's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, making note of her love for the show Dexter and status as a single mother. Eventually, the approach phase presented itself because the company was hiring. So the Ghost submitted a fake resume that eventually earned a job interview. Now, the day the interview did this, he posed as a down on his luck single father, who arrived 5 minutes later, rushing to drop his kids off. The man's attention, the encounter began. A friendly conversation of the show Dexter quickly transitioned to a sympathetic conversation about being a fellow single parent. And more comfortable, the Ghost realized he forgot to print his resume, asked his new Dexter buddy if he could print it from her company computer using his USB. She agreed. And just like that, the Ghost installed an infected file labeled resume.pdf, granting him access to the company network from his laptop back at his appointment. Fascinatingly enough, the strategies used by the Ghost in this story walk a fine line of social engineering and common devices we could all use. For instance, is Andy Flores in the audience? Especially is awesome. Andy, so in between these performances, I did a quick scroll through your Facebook and social media to get some basic information about you. Now, I know you're originally from San Antonio, Texas. Like, now you're State, you're your undergrad, you downtown from Austin. Your favorite TV shows are Broad City or Key and Peele. You love comedians like Melanie Hardesty. You have a mother named Diana and a sister named Alexandra. Yeah. Your birthday is October 14th. Mm-hmm. So, just as the Ghost used Dexter and Amanda's status as a single parent, I can use any of that information. Engineer a scenario where I run into you outside a coffee shop you might like, maybe the one in San Antonio called Mario Lisa. Strike up a conversation and get to know you more. And while I don't plan on doing anything malicious, a social engineer could have far different intentions. And that's the thing. Social engineering takes basic, public, often information we don't know is out there, weaponizes it, uses it to infiltrate corporate security or to be an anti-sense for personal privacy. And aforementioned Navy.explains, apart from top tech and security companies attending the American Social Engineering Contest, the FBI, NSA, and Department of Defense all attend this contest to analyze any strategies being used. The pervasive and effective use of social engineering warrants 2 implications: a paradigm shift in security and the weaponization of social media. First, the methods used by social engineers has been a paradigm shift within the security industry. Because for decades, security has operated under this mentality that we have to build walls tall enough and thick enough. But as CSO Online, January 2015 notes, social engineering forces us to start looking inside the walls of the breach. As a result, Tech Target on March 5, 2014 explained, companies have literally begun developing new training methods to teach employees on how to recognize and combat social engineering attacks. Michelle Venture, chief security researcher, tells Social Engineering Inc. on April 28, 2014, we are witnessing a culture shift. One that will require security to be round the clock, yes, but more importantly, forcing employees to start thinking in an entirely different way. Because when it comes to social engineering in the workplace, the only thing worse than no security is a false sense of security. Second, social engineering has led to the weaponization of social media and social information in our daily lives. Tech Target on March 5, 2014 explains, websites like Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook are a social engineer's dream come true, allowing them to harvest anything from job histories to emotionally compromising posts. As a result, Wall Street Journal and May 2014 explained, by the end of 2015, over 60% of companies will have a program in place to monitor their employees' social media, a dramatic increase from just 10% in 2012. And while most of the plan is all about good PR, in actuality, it may be one of the few ways to truly reduce a socially engineered attack. We've only complied with a friendly conversation at the bus stop or a drunk conversation with strangers at a bar. Where you from? Where you work? Casual questions we write off in small chat that social engineers use as information to take advantage That's your social identity. Today, we explore the methods used by social engineers to hopefully freak out Andy. You can reach her at underlightandy@gmail.com. I hope you got some really cool kind of trinkets or stuff in that yard sale you went to this morning. David's book, Ghosts and Liars, FBI's most wanted social engineer Kevin Mitnick explains it is the most effective communicators that make the best social engineers. So an activity that finds itself on being some of the most effective communicators, most of the people in this group are primed to do that. Try to get your skill set. What's next?
So, that was Kevin King, 2015 national champion, American college national champion in informative speaking. He spoke very rapidly. The acoustics were not great, but the recording will be available after class if you want to see it, along with a transcript for people who came in after the speech began. But what we are going to spend the middle part of class talking about are the elements, the nonverbal elements that make good public speaking delivery for an American audience. And there are only 3 of them. And I have these in the wrong order. Actually, no, I don't. Okay, to begin with, what do you do with your voice? A whole lot of public speaking settings in the United States have no microphone. I've come over here and I first caught some of my students off guard over at SUDA where they do have microphones, and I've seen the professors tend to use them. And you've seen from early on that I'm loud enough that I can make the walls in this room rattle. People, as they learn basic public speaking, learn to project and speak very loudly. Now, I have not been around that many settings where I've seen Japanese speakers speaking to Japanese audiences, but most of my experience in one-on-one conversation gives me the impression the polite thing to do, the default thing to do, is to lower your volume a bit. That a way to show that you are a likable and approachable person is just to speak a little more quietly. So one adjustment it will be important to make if you speak to an American audience. They expect you to project. Now, just a couple of words on that. By project, I do not mean shouting at people. Shouting is slamming air through your lungs, almost like punching it. Projecting is what you can do when you take a very deep breath and then use your strong abdominal muscles to force it out slowly in a steady stream. There are a lot of exercises that can help you with learning to be comfortable projecting for a long time. And I've taught classes that go on for 6 hours, and I can talk at this volume and have a voice at the end of it. The one simple exercise, this will look ridiculous, but it helps. Get next to a solid wall and push on it while talking, because what will happen is all the right muscles will tense. Another one I have at my university, because we have a music major, lots of students being given singing lessons. They've shown me this exercise. One hand goes here, one hand goes here. And as you speak, this hand should not move. This hand should. Because if you're inhaling like this, these muscles are weak. When you inhale, this ought to be the hand that moves, because these muscles are what allow you to slowly release a powerful stream and project. So that's the first thing. You need to project. And one more thing I'll say about it. You project not only so that people sitting in the back can hear you, although that is fundamental. If anybody in the room can't hear you, you might as well not be talking. But you also project because that's the way you convey your energy, your enthusiasm. That's the way you override distractions. If I came in here every week and I were teaching class like this, when it's right before lunch, and presumably a lot of you would like a nap, on a day like today, I would like a nap, it would be harder to keep your attention than if I do it this way. So a little bit higher in volume helps a lot. Second element of voice, more vocal variety. What Kevin did, I assume you noticed, as he got to the beginning of each thought, his pitch would go up high. Social engineering, he would talk like that, as though he was excited a lot of the time. A common mistake inexperienced speakers make is they'll talk the way they would talk conversationally to someone who's just 2 or 3 feet away. And I've called this sometimes the small room problem. Your speech delivery you're doing it right if your speech delivery seems bizarre when you talk to one person. So if I came up here to have a conversation, I would have the conversation like this. Now you'll notice my pitch is not going anywhere near as much. I'm not as loud. I'm not as animated. And if you ask me, what are you planning to do over Christmas? And I said, well, I plan to stay in, get some work done, she would think I had lost my mind. Inexperienced speakers will stand here and have a conversation. And for people sitting 20 feet away, it's not enough. But when you take not just your volume, but the variety in pitch, when you take that way up, you are presenting your emotion and your motivation to the back of the room. So, lots of variety in the pitch in your voice. One other I put down a note to say something about pitch variety is obviously very different between spoken Japanese and spoken English, but that's something I assume is taught in classes here by linguists who know more about it than I do. The final thing is what we call vocal clutter. Vocal clutter. Vocal clutter, you will hear American speakers who are not very effective. They'll get to the end of a thought, and over again, they'll say something like, And I gather, and I've been told, that in Japan, what is similar is saying etto or anno, and there are a few others, so desu ne. If you do it a lot, American speakers who do it a lot have developed it as a habit. Their brain is editing it out. They can't even hear themselves do it. You may have noticed, Kevin didn't do it one time. Didn't a single time. And for my entire career, teaching and coaching people to do it competitively, I've taught people some exercises that can help you get to where you don't or You may have noticed I don't often or More recent research, though, has shown a little bit of and makes a positive impression on the audience in the United States for American audiences. If you go back in American history, about 3 United States presidents, our president was a man from Texas named George W. Bush. The impression he made was that he never doubted anything he did. He was always sure, he was always confident. The president after him was Barack Obama. The impression he made was that he would always think very carefully, and he would sometimes struggle with his decisions. Now, why am I telling you this? Because when George Bush spoke, he did not often say or but President Obama said it all the time. You listen to him speak, and there's a lot of it. But the people he spoke to liked it, because they took the and they could tell he was thinking hard, and they thought, You should be thinking hard. These are complicated subjects that you have to deal with. So all of that to say, my advice now when you talk to American audiences is you shouldn't or so much that it's a bad habit, because that will be a distraction. Americans who listen to not very effective speakers will sometimes keep a tally of how many times the speaker said, And when I say keep a tally, if it's a professor who's doing it, they're taking notes, they'll keep a count of how many times the professor ummed, and then they'll compare it with their friends after class. How many today? Well, today it was 50. So if you're doing it that many, it's a bad habit. But if it's once in a while when you're thinking hard, it actually makes a positive impression. So when it comes to voice, you need to be loud enough, you need to have variety in your pitch, and a few ums and uhs are okay, but not a lot. Second, there is movement. And here I have 4 things to talk with you about. First of all, you stand upright, you stand straight up, good posture, but you don't stand like you're a soldier being reviewed by a superior officer. You'll notice Kevin was standing up as though he was full of energy and enjoying what he was doing, but he didn't stand like this. He didn't stand like he was scared. So, good posture, but not stiff posture. Second thing to say, to the best of your ability, keep your feet still. What sometimes ineffective or inexperienced speakers will do is they'll move their feet all over the place, or they'll rock back and forth. Often this is because they feel very, very nervous. And actually, I could have organized this a little bit better. Yeah, we'll get to it. They do this because they feel nervous, and I'm going to speak a little bit about the feeling of nervousness in a minute or two. So sit tight for that. But the one thing, before it slips my mind, did you notice his pattern of walking? Started the speech in the middle of the room. Then when it was time for him to get to his first main point, he walked over here, gave the whole first point here. Then when it was time for the second main point, he walked here. And then, when he wanted to talk about the implications, he walked over here and talked for a while. And then when he was done with the implications and it was time to conclude the speech, back here he came. The other speech we're going to watch, she's going to do the exact same thing. In competitive public speaking, we call that the triangle. And what I want you to understand is, I want you to know what the principle is behind it, but you should never do it. The principle behind it, it's a teaching exercise. They all do it to show they understand the principle. But after they graduate college, Kevin is now in Washington, D.C. working for a public relations firm, and he does not walk the triangle. But the principle behind it, we've talked in here about nonverbal immediacy. You show closeness to people. When I first showed you the visual of the guy leaning back, that's a non-immediacy behavior. And the guy leaning forward and listening, that is an immediacy behavior. That day, I gave the example, when someone asks a question, you walk toward them. You reduce the distance with them to show you feel close to them. Speakers are taught, come to one side of the room and approach part of your audience. You still make eye contact with the whole room, but you're close to this part of the room. Then, in another major organizational part of the speech, move to a different part of the room and address them close up. What this is teaching, it's teaching these student speakers, you don't stand in one place the whole time. I could show you my teaching evaluations over the years. If you stand in one place while you teach, students don't like it. They want you to move. But if you pace, if you move nonstop, That's distracting and it makes them nervous. Well, what's the good compromise between don't stand in one place, but don't move the whole time? The compromise is stand still when you work on a major idea. If you've got a major idea to talk about, stand still the whole time. Then, when you're done with that major idea and it's time to move to a different idea, that's when you go for a walk to a different part of the room. That's the principle behind that walking pattern. And it's a good habit for you to learn if you're going to speak to an American audience. All right. The last thing I wanted to talk about was gestures. If you go back and watch what Kevin did while he spoke, he moved his hands a lot. And the other speaker we're going to watch, she will move her hands a lot as well. Beginning speakers are often taught something called the box. The box is about here. It's about up to your nose. It's about down to your belt or your waist. And that, and a little out beyond, maybe about to your shoulders. That's the box. That's where they're taught your gestures ought to be. And in a normal-sized room, that's about right. But they were speaking in a very big room. So big gestures from the shoulder. When we talked before about dominance nonverbals, we talked about how big gestures from the shoulder show a lot of confidence and a lot of energy. You should be gesturing while you speak. And my conviction from my years of doing this, you should not necessarily plan what your gestures are going to be. Let your hands do what they do naturally. But when I said before, people rock back and forth because their nervous energy goes to their feet, let your nervous energy go to your hands. Because we talked before the week, we talked about kinesics. Illustrator gestures help an audience understand what you're saying, and they help an audience remember what you're saying. And here I have one or two things to say about the fear of public speaking. The fear of public speaking. There's a whole 45-minute lesson I teach. If you don't like speaking in front of audiences and it makes you feel afraid, I got a whole class meeting on that, which you're not getting today because most of it is not about nonverbal communication. But I have a little bit that is. We have it wired into us to feel unsafe when lots of eyes are pointed at us. We said a long time ago in this class, direct eye contact is a challenge. When you've got lots of eyes pointed at you, that could be a herd of predators, coyotes or wolves that are about to eat you. It could be an angry mob that are about to beat you to death. For either of those possibilities, most of us tend to feel a little nervous, a little excited when lots of eyes are all pointed at us. Your body is releasing fight or flight chemicals. Epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol. They come out of your adrenal glands, which are on top of your kidneys, right here. So that feeling like this, you feel scared, you feel nervous, that's chemicals. That's all it is. So then, you may have noticed Kevin seemed a little hyper. He seemed a little overly excited. You may have noticed I get up here and I'm loud and I do silly things. Do you know what that's doing? Those fight or flight chemicals, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and cortisol, that's rocket fuel. That's your body producing what you need to run away fast. And when you stand in one place just talking, but you've got rocket fuel in your bloodstream, of course you feel nervous. So if you do things that are active, that consume energy, it controls those feelings. The fuel gets burned. So, big delivery is good because it makes your message memorable and it holds your audience's attention. It's also good because it's one of the best ways to control the feeling of nervousness by burning up the chemicals that are causing you to feel nervous. All right. Third part. Face. And with face, I include eyes. And as a matter of fact, let's do eyes first. If you really want to be effective with American audiences, your eyes should be on them the whole time. In conversation, you want to keep direct eye contact about 60% of the time. You can spend the rest of the time looking around, looking down to remember things. But when you speak to an audience, keep your eyes on them. My beginning public speaking students will look anywhere except at the people in the room. They'll look at the ceiling, they'll look at the walls, they'll have notes, they keep looking at their notes, and every once in a while they'll glance at the audience to make sure they're still there. Your eyes should be on your audience, and in particular, it's acceptable, it's okay to just scan over them, kind of looking momentarily at each person. That's okay. But if you want to be really effective, and if you go back and watch Kevin, I about guarantee you this is what he's doing. As he makes eye contact with members of his audience, he stays with one person for about one thought, and then he goes to the next person for about one thought, and he keeps moving around the room, but he's not scanning. He's not glancing at people for a moment. He stays with them for just 1 second. When you do that, you don't stay with one person long enough to make them nervous. As a matter of fact, when you don't stay with one person long enough that they feel singled out and nervous, and they think, why is he talking only to me and ignoring everybody around me? Don't do that. But about one sentence with one person, then on to the next person for one sentence. Stay long enough to make a connection. If you do that, that is something that can make your speaking very powerful. The one other thing that I want to say about face. We talked in here previously, the day we talked about display of emotion, about emotional display rules. Emotional display rules. And I'm going to give you a pretty simple formula for what emotions you want to show, depending on whether the speech is informative or whether the speech is persuasive. Now, a lot of your speeches will be both, but you should ask yourself the question, is this chiefly, primarily to inform them or primarily to persuade them? If it is primarily to inform them, then there should be two modes, I guess. You should flip back and forth between two modes. The first mode is just when you're giving them facts, pure facts. Then in that situation, you should sound confident and focused, and that's it. Nothing else should be coming off you as an emotional display. Confident and focused, alert. But then you're also going to tell them why it matters. Whenever you tell them why it matters, the best emotion to convey is intensely curious or pleased by how cool it is. Can you believe how cool, how fascinating this is? Because your interest will be contagious. The research on emotional contagion is pretty solid. You can get up. There have been people who've won the national championship for informative speaking in the United States giving speeches about dirt. But as they spoke about dirt, first of all, there were creative things they did with the content. But second, they showed they were so enthusiastic that the enthusiasm caught on. That's what you want to do when it's an informative speech. Confident and alert on the facts, and then on why it matters. That's where you are excited over how cool this is. Now, persuasive speech is different. And we're going to watch one in a minute. Part of a persuasive speech will be about the facts, and I'll say the same thing as I did about the informative speech. You should sound confident, and you should sound focused. But in a persuasive speech, you need to motivate the audience to agree with you that something is not right. And that usually means appealing to their emotion. And there are a few different emotions you could appeal to. You could appeal to fear. You might be persuading the audience they need to take anti-COVID measures. That probably would involve an appeal to fear. COVID is out there. It can make you very sick. It could make your neighbors or your family very sick, or it could even kill them if you were giving this speech. You sometimes, in a persuasive speech, appeal to anger. Someone's being treated unfairly. Someone's suffered a lot and nobody is helping them. And you are angry about it and you want your audience to be angry. Or things have happened that make you sad, that make you anguished, heartbroken. You want to convey that to your audience. Think about what emotion will motivate your audience to agree that there is a problem and that problem must be addressed, and then convey that emotion. Not on the facts necessarily, but when you explain why they matter. And I put this at the end, the emotional display, at the end of the part today where I was going to talk, because it's good setup for the persuasive speech. This is the 2019 National Champion in Public Speaking, or in Persuasive Speaking. I don't know why I switched that off. Her name is Emily Trader. Once again, the acoustics aren't perfect, but once again, that's not right. I'm hoping it'll figure out that it's, well, you gonna do this? Oh, good. There we go.
Dawn's relationship with her boyfriend was perfect. He drove her with his sports car and his sense of humor. And his good looks probably didn't hurt either. But as she explained to the personal interview on September 24th, 2018, after only a year, seemingly small arguments spiraled into significant fights. And those fights into 2 years of domestic violence. He isolated her from friends and family, beat her, and nearly broke her jaw on a coffee table before she sought help. So Dawn contacted the police on 2 different occasions, and both times they couldn't understand her, so they provided no help. Dawn is deaf and communicates exclusively with American Sign Language. ASL, while used by 2 million Americans, is virtually absent from domestic violence resources. For victims, the only way to get help is to hear. The National Association of the Deaf on July 25th, 2018 elaborates, abusers, usually hearing, are in the perfect position to limit access to cell phones, Wi-Fi, and face-to-face interactions, leaving their victims completely isolated. And resources like police, shelters, financial aid programs, meant to help victims escape violence, are ineffective because they don't consider the unique challenges posed to deaf victims. Sadly, hearing impairment isn't just a communicative barrier. It's a weapon wielded by abusers for a morbidly painful and traumatizing experience. So it's not surprising. The National Domestic Violence Hotline reports the deaf and hard of hearing community is 150% more likely to experience domestic violence than their hearing counterparts. And considering 1 in 6 deaf men and 1 in 2 deaf women will be victims of domestic violence in their lifetime, it is crucial we uncover causes and effects before committing to solutions. Because for my community, domestic violence programs don't give us a voice. They only muffle our cries for help. After a history of discrimination, the deaf community struggles to trust the hearing. For this reason, I won't broadcast survivors' narratives to to a hearing audience without the survivor's explicit consent. Every story I share was recounted by courageous and resilient individuals who remain in control of how their narrative is used in my speech. Narratives that exist for two reasons: communication barriers and financial abuse. Initially, law enforcement and shelters are unable and often unwilling to communicate with death victims. The Atlantic, September 26, 2018 explains, when the police respond to a death and domestic violence call, they rarely, if ever, call an interpreter to the scene. Instead, they let the spouse, usually the abuser, interpret, so they can distort victim testimony to convince police it was death victim's understanding, not a life-threatening attack. And victims seeking shelter care face the same negligence. The Domestic Shelter Organization of March 3rd, 2018 notes, ASL is the third most common language used in domestic violence shelters. But only 5% of shelters across the country have access to ASL interpreters. These victims just fled isolation, only to find it again from the same institution promising them safety. Next, death victims cannot afford to leave their abusers. While most domestic violence victims face this obstacle, the Communication Service for the Deaf of June 21st, 2018 reports 50% of deaf people are unemployed and depend on Social Security checks as their main source of income. So in most deaf domestic violence cases, the abuser controls the victim's finances to trap and extort them. So while staying means enduring painful abuse, leaving is worse. A deaf survivor, Rose, explained to me on October 9, 2018. Her abuser took her Social Security checks every month and only gave her enough to survive. She desperately wanted to leave, but doing so meant living on the streets. And her abuser knew it. Survivor Ruth explained on January 31st, 2019. Her husband threatened to kill her after 2 years of physical abuse. But for her, the worst part was knowing there was nowhere to go and no one to help her. Exemplifying two effects: resources traumatize victims, and abuse is cyclical. Initially, domestic violence programs re-traumatize deaf victims. The Arizona Central, September 18, 2018 reports, the average length of stay for a hearing person in a shelter is 6 days. For a deaf victim, it's less than 24 hours. Because for them, communicating with their abuser is preferable to confinement. As Rose explained, when she sought help at a local organization in Ohio, the only person available to interpret for her was her own father. She asked me to imagine what it would be like to disclose every detail of my trauma to my father, simply because I had no other way to communicate. I couldn't. Finally, deaf victims can't afford to leave, so the cycle of abuse continues. In a 2017 seminal study, sociologists at the Rochester Institute of Technology found, of all deaf domestic violence victims, 54% endured sexual abuse, 65% physical violence, 89% emotional abuse, and 90% of victims suffer at least 2 forms of abuse. So it's not surprising. The Family Service Foundation of January 13, 2018 points out, the deaf and hard of hearing community is also twice as likely to develop PTSD and anxiety than hearing people. Because even if they seek help, even if resources accommodate them, and even if they eventually live in a safe environment, their fear, their pain, and the aftermath of their trauma never goes away. The topic of domestic violence is not new, but we as a community have excluded deaf voices because we don't hear them. We can start now with solutions on institutional and individual levels. Initially, law enforcement and shelters need to update their protocols. In collaboration with the Abused Deaf Women Advocacy Services, I created a packet with detailed procedures for shelters and stations to follow when faced with deaf or hard of hearing victims. Write down your zip code here. I will compile a list of interpreters in your area and send it with the packet to your local shelter. and station. I've got all the information. All you need to do is tell me where to send it. And you have. So far this season, I've sent 63 packets and received 7 responses committing to accessible protocol. Thank you. Please continue to help me make your communities more inclusive. Finally, it is crucial we make efforts to communicate with deaf victims when we see them. If you know ASL, volunteer at local domestic violence shelter. I have a packet listing every shelter across the country and their contact information. Take a picture after the round and let them know you can interpret. And if you don't know ASL, let's learn them now. This is the sign for, are you hurt? So point to the person you're talking to. Then you both point your fingers parallel to each other, one off the other, and just twist. That was perfect, that was perfect. And even if not perfect, we'll still understand you. Are you hurt? That's perfect. This is the sign for, I will help you. So point to yourself, one palm faces the ceiling, the other hand makes a fist. Put them together and raise. Point to that. So I will help you. I will help you. Perfect. If you need a review or want to know more, find me anytime after the round, or just grab this cheat sheet. Keep it in your wallet or purse, the back of your phone, literally anywhere. We have the opportunity to make our communication more inclusive. Together, we can send the deaf and hard of hearing a new message. You deserve safety. We hear you. And we will help you. Dawn, Rose, and Ruth are just 3 members of my community willing to share their stories with me. And all of you, their courage and resilience is heroic. And after exploring the causes and effects, we must commit to solutions. To finally give them the voice they deserve.
So, I am hoping that out of that, what we have talked about, those 3 things,
Story's been selected for a pilot program. We just needed to.
that's not right.
CNN Miami State 2012 displays.
Yeah, hush. What we talked about projection, about vocal variety, about minimizing ums and uhs, about moving about the room to take advantage of immediacy, about big gestures that absorb a lot of the fight or flight chemicals, about keeping your feet still when working on a major idea, and then her eye contact and her facial expressions, and in particular the difference in emotional display between the first speech and the second. Kevin just sounded like he thought this was fascinating. But you could hear Emily, because that was her name, almost on the brink of tears. One little detail, I didn't know this the first time I watched the speech, but she keeps calling it my community, my community. She's almost completely deaf. And someone who's almost completely deaf, who can win a national championship in persuasive speaking, that to me was awfully impressive. Okay, what I want to do at the end of class, I have coached this for a long time. Do you have anything you want to ask me about public speaking situations for American audiences? Because I can answer questions about nonverbals off the top of my head, but public speaking even more so. So I'm a resource that's available to you. Is there anything you've been curious about while this has been going on today? Yes, ma'am.
You said like when you do the gestures,
Mm-hmm.
just like don't decide what you're going to do. But I don't really make any gestures, so in that case, what should I do?
So the question was, I said before, when you gesture, don't plan in advance what your gestures are going to be, and then it was that you don't tend to gesture any at all. This is something I run into a lot with student speakers, which is they're not in the habit of gesturing at all when they talk to a room full of people. So here's where I think you ought to begin. And I tell students who take public speaking from me, about half the time, I want your hands above your waist, and I want them a few inches out from your body. So just do this. And you will, little by little, sometimes not much at first. You'll just do something like this. But then you'll notice you start numbering off points. If you've got 2 or 3 reasons, you'll start to do that. Or there'll be something that you really need to emphasize. And you do this naturally. And you show that something is progressing, something is moving on. And when that's where you let your nervous energy go, you can grow into the kind of person who does talk with your hands, but you don't have to consciously talk with your hands. It may look as though the 2 speakers we saw today had very choreographed, planned gestures, but I have to tell you, they wrote that speech at the beginning of the American school year, so they wrote it in about August. They gave that speech 4 or 5 times every weekend through the school year until April, which is when Nationals is. So for 8 months, they've given that speech in competition about 150 times, which is not counting practice. So yes, after all those times, the gestures do look a little planned. But there are some events where they're given the topic and they're given maybe a minute to write the speech, and they gesture just as much. So, did that help? Very good. Anyone else have a question about public speaking delivery for American audiences? It's okay if you think of the question later. It's been true the whole time, but it's especially true for this topic. Email it to me. I will email you back. And if it's a question everybody would benefit from hearing the answer to, I will carve out time in January when we get back together. So, until now, I have sent you off into the world with a blessing that was consistent every time. But it's Christmas, so I have a special one. This is a very traditional Christmas greeting between people who are Christians. It's only going to take a second. Hitori no midori go ga watashi tachi no tame ni umareru. Hitori no otoko no ko ga watashi tachi ni ataerareru. Shuken wa sono kata ni ari. Sono naha fushigina jogonsha ryoko ari kami eien no chichi heiwa no kimi to yobareru. And just in case that was completely unintelligible, there it is. For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the authority will be on his shoulders, and he will be known as Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Class is dismissed. Merry Christmas. If you're going to travel, travel safe, and I will see you in January.